just a fake silhouette, avoiding every threat. I wanna stay like a silhouette, but I can't do that, no I can't do that.
Hey internet friends, I don't know who needs to hear this, but it's okay to say no. Many of us feel uncomfortable saying no because we're afraid of conflict, we're afraid of standing out from the crowd, because we grow up well-behaved and compliant and we place value on the comfort of others and very little on ourselves. My mother tried to teach me this lesson when I was young, how to say no, but quite frankly it took decades to transmit. The idea that no was enough of an answer. It didn't need an excuse or an apology attached to it. All that was ever needed from me was the confidence to make the right call. And sometimes that right call was no. Just no. Full stop. This lesson applies to all things in life, whether it's creating boundaries personally or professionally. We're even dealing with this new abnormal we've been sold every single day in 2020.
Police are preparing to launch their aerial arsenal as part of a crackdown on COVID rule breakers.
Making sure skate parks and playgrounds remain empty, and for those who head to the park, a mask is a must.
Authorities in Melbourne, Australia have announced the release of high-tech surveillance drones that will be utilized to identify individuals outside not wearing masks as well as scan for cars that are in violation of curfew. Previous measures over the last few weeks have included drivers being asked to produce papers at certain highway checkpoints just to get to work. With only one person per household allowed to leave their house, limited to one outing a day, and permitted to pick up essentials as long as it's within 5 kilometers of their home. The consequences for being in violation of any of these aforementioned transgressions, whether that be the inability to produce papers to justify your departure from home, being outside without wearing a mask, or disobeying the strict 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew will result in a massive fine. Furthermore, to enforce these restrictions and government control over the people, Australia's Prime Minister announced on August 18th that the corona vaccine would be compulsory, with the exception of those with medical exemptions. A spokesperson added that in order to incentivize Australians to get vaccinated, they would consider a no jab, no pay policy, meaning that if you don't get the inoculation, you could be barred from returning to work.
I suspect the majority of Australians will get vaccinated. There needs to be some sort of incentive stick, perhaps, through the current programs, including no jab, no pay.
I'm incredibly curious how Australians under lockdown are feeling right now. How are you feeling about the possibility of no jab, no pay, especially within the context of a speedy and rush vaccine? Do you believe that your right to freedom is outweighed by potential health risks? Do you believe that once the public health risk, whether real or exaggerated, is dialed back, that these tyrannical and draconian measures will be dialed back in tandem? Or will they remain as the new normal for the foreseeable future? Australians aren't the only ones in this boat. New Zealand appears to be on board with this worldwide authoritarian takeover as well. Even though a court ruled just yesterday that New Zealand's government broke the law when it told residents to stay at home during the early days of Corona, Auckland, New Zealand's most populated city, still remains under level 3 lockdown, which means there's a stay-at-home order except for essential personal movement. And much like Australia, New Zealand has incentivized its citizens to comply. And recently, when the Prime Minister was asked what happens if citizens refuse to be tested for the virus, she replied that they actually cannot refuse, that they will be held by the government in a government quarantine facility for the designated period of 14 days, and should they refuse to be tested after that 14 days, they will be held by the government for another 14 days. So okay, what about your job? What about your children? What happens to your livelihood and family during the period when your government holds you against your will in a facility? Until you comply.
As part of our overall national response to this new outbreak, I am now directing medical officers of health that all cases, confirmed cases, are to be managed in a quarantine facility.
New Zealand and Australia aren't the only countries experiencing medical tyranny or martial law disguised as quarantine. And let me just ask, does the propagated public health risk justify what's happening in these countries? And are you willing to comply to say nothing until your country ends up like theirs? Are you willing to stay silent until you have drones buzzing around your head, scanning your face, watching your every move, and making sure you're wearing a mask? These pressing questions bring me to my original point, the art of saying no on an individual basis. It appears that New Zealand, Australia, and other countries have missed the opportunity to say no as individuals. In order to stand up for their personal freedoms and liberties, they're going to have to collectively come together and do so. And that seems real hard to do when you're only allowed to leave your house once a day for groceries. None of these draconian measures they've implemented during lockdown are going to end until the people themselves end it. But in countries like my own, the United States, I still believe we have the opportunity to say no. But the problem is, most of us are waiting for someone else to say it for us, especially in the form of a politician. Most of us don't want to be the first person to say no within our own families or friend groups. We don't want the potential for conflict, the possibility of standing out, or making people feel uncomfortable. But while we're all waiting for someone else to rise up and be the hero, to say no, enough is enough, our businesses are going under. Our families are running out of money, our children are being further isolated from their peers, and the circumstances are not improving. The reality is the full effect of the 2020 lockdown hasn't even been felt yet, but fear-based mind control is pumped out around the clock, meant to keep us silent, compliant, and distracted. While our television programming is purposefully omitting major stories, some people are rising up, and they've done a glorious job of it. On August 1st, a huge protest was organized in Berlin with the sole purpose of rising up against the German government's lockdown restrictions. When American media finally got a hold of this story, they majorly downplayed the numbers of protesters present and painted all of the protesters as neo-Nazis and conspiracy theorists. Because when the media uses ad hominem attacks, derogatory terms like neo-Nazi and conspiracy theorist, they're hoping that everyone who reads this story will automatically dismiss whatever the person labeled a neo-Nazi is protesting. But hey, it didn't work. More protests against lockdown measures erupted across Europe and even beyond.
Abertausende Wissenschaftler, Ärzte weltweit, die werden nicht gehört, die werden mundtot gemacht, die werden zensiert oder als Verschwörungstheoretiker diskreditiert, obwohl sie ganze Universitäten geleitet haben. Dagegen protestiere ich.
Hoy, para que termine todo esto, estas sinvergüenzas que tenemos de política, estos sinvergüenzas que tenemos de policía, estos sinvergüenzas que tenemos de periodistas, que se han vendido.
These people seem to get it. It's not about what we can personally endure. It's about what kind of world we're creating for the future. Will we be lulled into silence by fear with our personal freedoms and liberties being taken from us on the daily without even as much as a peep from us? Or can we change our trajectory by doing the tiniest little thing, saying no while we still can? There's this quote, and I'm pretty sure it's from a video game commercial, but it's a really good quote. I totally love it. This morning, I was just a drop, a single drop that soon became a river. So let me tell you a story. I was walking behind this gentleman going into the grocery store the other day, and next to where you get the buggies, you know how there's that employee counting every person who goes in the store standing next to this Costco-sized bottle of hand sanitizer? Well, anyway, that person at the door saw the man walking in front of me, and he didn't have a mask on. So she very politely asked him if he wanted one and reminded him of the store policy. And you know what he said? He said, "No, thank you." And he smiled and gave her a thumbs up. And you know what happened as a result? Not a single thing. The door lady didn't body slam him. No one pulled out their phone and recorded the incident so they could send it to his employer to get him fired. Nothing happened except me thinking to myself, you beautiful, glorious man, you, and the stranger next to him saying no thank you to the mask when prompted by the lady moments later. I love witnessing confident and firm no's in the wild. You get my point, I'm sure. You don't have to be the river or the riptide or a tsunami. All you have to be is a drop. Your personal threshold for what you're willing to tolerate will be different than mine. Maybe you love wearing the mask, but you're worried about contact tracing. Maybe you like working from home just as much as the next person, but you've done a bunch of research on sponsored rush medical treatments, and the idea of a compulsory vaccine keeps you up at night. Maybe you thought this lockdown was a good idea at first, but after seeing your children suffer, you're having second thoughts. Or heck, maybe you're ready to throw your smartphone off a bridge right now, who knows? Whatever it is, whatever your personal threshold is, understand that you have the opportunity to stop that line in the sand from being crossed. And saying no is the first step. Because you must never forget, we outnumber them. Normal, everyday people outnumber those who seek to oppress us. What do you think, internet friends? You know, I always look forward to reading your comments. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and supporting my channel on Patreon. Bye!